On November 5th, 1930, the third Academy Awards took place to hand out awards for the months between August of 1929 to the end of July of 1930. If you watched the last On the Oscars video, you'll remember that the second Academy Awards also took place in 1930, making this the only year with two Oscar ceremonies in the same year. This was probably since they wanted to make it more of a thing and they realized it was going to become more of a thing, so they just started moving the ceremony closer to the actual time frame. Either way, that's about all the trivia and history I have for this award ceremony, so let's dive right into the review. The third winner was All Quiet on the Western Front, based on the best-selling novel of the same name by Erich Maria Remarque. It was also the first movie to win both the Oscar for Outstanding Picture and the Oscar for Best Director. If you know anything about the Academy, you know that usually these awards go hand in hand, but, this was still a first. The plot is simple. A group of German students, with American accents for some strange reason, are encouraged by their teacher, played by Arnold Lucy, to go join the fight for World War I. They leave, expecting to become heroes and serve the glory of their country, but are very quickly given a rude awakening. Now, this seems like your standard war movie setup, even at the time, really. Hell, the movie that won the Oscar for Outstanding Picture only 2 years ago had the exact same plot. From what I just said, you know what's going to happen. The boys are going to find out that war isn't all it's cracked up to be, and either they're going to get the axe, or someone they know will, and they'll come back all the wiser. But what makes All Quiet on the Western Front stand out is just how dark it is. Now, upon hearing that phrase, you might be thinking to yourself, how the hell could a movie from 1930 be that dark? I just got out of watching the newest Saw movie where a man has to commit horrific acts of self-harm to appease fucked up audience members like me. Well, calm yourself, my sadomasochistic child. It's actually a pretty common misconception that older films were a lot more tame because of people's sensitivities. As a matter of fact, older directors would have probably been more than happy to show you some disturbing imagery if the technology was there. The problem is that for most of the middle part of the 20th century, filmmakers were subject to the Hays Code. What's the Hays Code, you ask? Well, it's basically the precursor to the modern-day rating system, and enforced what were called quote-unquote moral guidelines to all films coming out of Hollywood. So things like extreme violence, explicit sex, swearing, and everything else that makes movies cool weren't allowed. The reason why I'm talking about this is because while the Hays Code was invented in 1930, it actually wasn't really enforced until 1934. Thus, many movies for the first half of the 30s were actually a bit edgier than you may expect. So when I say that All Quiet on the Western Front is dark, I mean it's really freaking dark. Like, it's not Saving Private Ryan level, but they really hammer home the sense of horror and loss. Hell, there's even a few deaths that can actually be pretty graphic. But what really makes All Quiet on the Western Front great is how psychedelic it gets. In case you're thinking that means the movie's stylized, it's actually the exact opposite. Many war movies at this time were known for these great epic panning shots and heroic deeds. The camera work here, on the other hand, is a lot more realistic. The film's very non-stylized, in fact. Instead, it's all just far-away shots and uncomfortable close-ups, showing things for how they are and hammering home the realism. This gritty atmosphere is also enhanced by the music in the film, or, to be more accurate, the lack thereof. I mentioned in my last review that due to the limitations of audio equipment at the time, films from this time period were pretty much incapable of having music at the same time as dialogue. As a result, many of these early sound films end up sounding a little empty. It's tough to explain unless you watch one yourself, but a lot of them feel like there should be music in certain scenes, but instead they just end up being really quiet. You don't get that here, as the film is actually better off without any background music. Most of the movie takes place in either the trenches or well within hearing distance of the trenches, within the blast radius of the shells. Thus, most of the background noise is filled with the constant bombardment of shell explosions. When you contrast this with the gentle chitter-chatter of the city scenes, it really makes it feel like you've been transported to another world. One that has no mercy or sense to it, just death. Death and explosions. The movie isn't all atmosphere though, and there's still a great story with great characters to back it up. There's sort of a recurring group of faces in the second company that you get to know over the course of the film, each of whom has their own unique, memorable personality. Plus, the things they talk about really hammer in the sense of loss. Not just loss of life, but loss of self. There's many, many memorable scenes, like the cook refusing to serve them food, the bit about why the war is even being fought, the scene where the main kid spends the night in a foxhole with a dead soldier. So many good moments. And finally, there's the battle scenes themselves. All Quiet on the Western Front was one of the chief influences for the infamous Omaha Beach scene from Saving Private Ryan. And watching it, it's easy to see why. You really feel how chaotic it is and ultimately are rooting for our characters to make it out okay. Not because they're fighting for some great cause, but because you want to see them survive as individuals. All this combines to making the most thematically accurate film about World War I I've ever seen. I know that there's probably some historical inaccuracies if you want to look for them, but I'm just saying that the idea of World War I is gotten across. By that I mean, World War I is one of the most unique wars in world history, and that the more you read about it, the more insane it sounds. Millions of people were dying in dirty, filthy, parasite-infested trenches, all to fight over just a few inches of land. There was no V-Day of sitting on a battleship, drinking some scotch to reflect on a job well done. There was just death, destruction, more death, and loss. Hell, there's a reason why the entire generation of young men that fought in World War I became known as the Lost Generation. Centuries of stories of chivalrous European knights fighting for glory was preached to these children, and they were all either wiped out or changed forever. And that was the note about the guys over here in America, the winners who only entered at the tail end of the war. All Quiet on the Western Front is about the Germans, the guys who lost the war and were in it from the beginning. In fact, that's the other thing I really love about this film, and what really surprised me. They're very fair to the German people. Remember, we're only about 12 years removed from when the war actually ended. To not only make these characters three-dimensional, but make an entire movie centering around them at the time was a serious risk, and it really paid off. In fact, I actually can't think of a single stereotype in the film. Not one. Now, the movie isn't perfect. There are a few scenes here and there that feel a bit like filler, but at the very least, it's a bit better than other films since these scenes do actually have kind of a point. Probably the biggest issue with the film, though, is that it revolves around a group of 6 or 7 kids, but they all sort of meld together into one character. I don't mean that in the sense that maybe, they're a bit dull individually. I mean, they literally all have the exact same personality. All of them are a bunch of arrogant snobs who get their innocence ruined by the war. But there's nothing individually that stands out. Like, there's not one who's probably a bit more intelligent, one who's nerdier, one who's more of a jock. They all just sort of meld together into one character. Also, the guy who plays the main kid, Paul, Lou Aries, isn't always the best actor. Like, he does fine when he's the twit, and he does fine when he's the ice-cold soldier, but the transition in between, he's not the best. But that's the thing, though. You actually don't mind that his performance isn't always all there, because the stuff he's saying and the situations he finds himself in are so powerful that it doesn't matter. His acting is serviceable enough to back up what he's saying, and what he's saying is very poignant stuff. When it comes time for the climax of the film, his final speech gives me chills. I won't spoil what happens at the end, but let me just say the last 20 minutes of this film will really leave you feeling empty. All Quiet on the Western Front is a very effective, powerful, and well-written war movie, even over 80 years later, and is easily one of the darkest films to have ever won the Academy Award for Outstanding Picture. It's so dark, in fact, I'm actually wondering why it even won. It's an amazing film, don't get me wrong, but the Academy very rarely goes for movies that are this dark. Usually they go for films that are sort of a, neutered dark, or maybe have some uncomfortable things, but ultimately a happy ending. This is neither of those things. It's just straight up depressing. Now, you might think that the obvious answer is that it's because these awards took place during the throes of the Great Depression. That actually doesn't fully answer it for 2 reasons. First is that the second Academy Award ceremony also took place in 1930, after the stock market crash, but the Broadway melody wasn't all that dark either. On top of that, Hollywood actually turned out to be one of the very few depression-proof industries. While the rest of the country went to hell, Hollywood entered its golden age, churning out hit after classic after masterpiece. The 1930s were pretty much one of the biggest booms of the studio system history, so if anyone wasn't feeling the effects of the Great Depression, it was these guys. So why did It's All Quiet on the Western Front win the Oscar then? Well, I don't really know the answer here, but I guess what it comes down to is just the fact that this is a really damn good movie. Even if you're not into watching older films, I'd actually recommend checking this one out. It's dark, it's gritty, it's one of the best portrayals of World War I ever put to film, and it was very ahead of its time. Well worth at least one viewing.
Is that gasoline I smell?